Welcome back into the theatre. Take your seats quickly. Thank you. The first National Visual Arts Education Conference that I attended as a visitor myself was in 2019. Nick Mitrovic at that time had just been appointed the new director of the National Gallery of Australia. At that conference, he gave a really inspirational talk about being brave and bold in the arts. I never imagined when I was one of the educators sitting in this very room in the crowd that I would be one day standing here and that Nick would be my boss and I would be introducing him at this conference. So I'd like you to put your hands together and welcome the Director of the National Gallery of Australia, Nick Mitrovic.
Good morning, everybody. It's such a great pleasure to have you here on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country, and I pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that the National Gallery has a very important job of elevating First Nations perspectives here in Canberra, all across Australia and around the world. And to that end, we're so proud that Emily Naware will premiere in London summer 2025. And I think it's really important that we continue to advance the understanding of First Nations culture. It's so great to have so many of you here in the summer. I've just got back from summer holiday, and it's so nice to be back here at the gallery, and I'm sure some of you have had to give up your summer holidays to be here, so the commitment of being here is certainly not lost on us. But learning and education are such an important part of the fabric of the National Gallery. Curiously, you might be interested that out of the 6 directors that the National Gallery has had since it was initiated, 4 of us, me included, started our careers as art teachers or educators. And so the fabric of the institution has been woven with that experience. I started teaching at Balranald Central, which is the most westerly school in New South Wales. I did teach for 9 weeks and 4 days. I had a job interview on the last day of term, and I was seduced into the world of galleries and have been here for the last 35 years. And I'll finished my career in galleries because I love the idea of connecting art and people, connecting artists and ideas and causing discussion. And what's exciting about the speaker that you're going to hear from today is that Tony Albert lives and breathes art. And one of his great passions is connecting people and art together. He's an artist, he's an educator, he's founded a career by connecting people together. He's one of the founding artists of the Proper Now Collective, a really important group of artists that have transformed the way that we see art from an urban perspective. He's worked in public institutions and volunteered his time to help connect people and art together. So he lives and breathes the things that we all believe in, and that's what makes Tony Albert such a potent person to have as part of this conference. As an important First Nations artist, he's really carved an individual voice and profile in art. He's added to our understanding of art history by drawing from the past, by critiquing it and giving it his own vocabulary and voice. And as a leading Australian artist, those aspects make him such a compelling artist to consider in the present, but also points to where art might head in the future. And what I love about it, it's totally serious. It's at times humorous, at times confronting and interesting, but always so engaging and always so unexpected. But the visual language that he established very early on in his career continues to build on. And so artists that make breakthroughs in the way that we see art and art history are the ones that bring an individual vocabulary to their practice. And that's what makes Tony Albert such a compelling artist to think about today. But importantly as well, he hasn't just sat in the studio. He's an artist that reaches out and connects, and his work in public institution has been so instrumental over the last decade to connect audiences and art. And his work at the Art Gallery of New South Wales and a number of public boards like the Sydney Public Art Panel and working for the Queensland Children's Hospital have been good examples of how connecting people outside of galleries has been really important. Tony is a Grimmay, Yidinji, Kuku-Yalanji artist, and I'm sorry that I tried my best with the pronunciation, because what we have to do is make sure language is important, and sometimes we trip up, but it's always so important in terms of respect to try. And my first language is Macedonian, so sometimes I even struggle with English, and but it just doesn't stop me from trying to make sure that we honour language. It's my great pleasure to welcome Tony to the lectern, and I trust you enjoy his talk and the conversations and the dialogue that we have about art and artists during this important time. Thank you, and please welcome Tony to the lectern.
Thank you so much, Nick. Well, the art world has an interesting way, I think, of the introduction, and how closely it sits to a potential eulogy is quite interesting. I always feel I'm sitting there witnessing my funeral, and they're very lovely words, so thank you. And for the sake of this talk also, I just want to mention I'm not going to talk exactly to slides. They're just going to roll along behind me. And at multiple times through this week, I've changed what I'm talking about, and I've realised the value of that connectivity and the potential for questions after. So I hope I've also left plenty of time, and please consider those questions and the opportunity to engage. I feel that's very much what I'm here for, and as Nick mentioned, that I love so much. This does represent over 2 decades for me being involved in the art world. This goes back to Nick's time in Queensland at UQ, but it has made me, particularly in the last few years, so interested in philanthropic engagement and the duty of care we have as people, let alone artists or people within this industry, to nurture a younger generation and utilise the skills we have in continuing to share and learn. So I just wanted to say that before I started. And thank you, that I've really enjoyed being here this week. And I'd like to start by paying my respect to the land on which we gather and acknowledge the Ngambri and Ngunnawal people who have cared for this country from time immemorial to forever. I acknowledge elders past and present, and those young, deadly mob who continue to carry the flame of our ancestors with them. Thank you to Brother Paul House for taking the time to come and officially welcome us. The intrinsic link and nature between our languages and the world that we live on is so significant, and I love hearing language being spoken, and I wish that we could witness much more of that in our daily lives. Again, thank you to Director Nick Mitrovic and the team at the National Gallery for having me, and it's an honour and privilege to be at the National Visual Art Education Conference. I also wanted to acknowledge colleague Kelly Cole. I'm not sure if he's here today, but with co-curator Hetty Perkins of the incredible Emily Kamnaware exhibition, the keynote speech, the opening keynote speech, and her words were absolutely brilliant. I acknowledge all the speakers, particularly those who have travelled internationally to be here, and finally all the teachers, artists, cultural practitioners and thought leaders. As the invitation states, you inspire and energise best practice teaching and learning in the visual arts. So as an artist, I salute you all. I wouldn't be in the position I am in if it had not been for the incredible educators in my life, those who saw the potential and enthusiasm I had for art and creativity and continue to foster and inspire me. Your job does not exist without us artists, but we do not exist without you. I am in awe of the fact, for myself as an artist to have incredible conduits between my work and the people that you all educate. One of the best ways to share our history and stories is through art. I believe art is a gift, and for me, that's a great way to explore historical truth and to also challenge perspectives. When I was growing up, I didn't know anything about art other than the very limited idea of art being a really pretty or perfectly executed picture. My family didn't know or visit state institutions, and it seemed that Indigenous art and iconography were barren within our education system and also our cultural landscape. Now, I'm a kinship carer, and look after an 8-year-old child, and I'm so inspired to walk into school daily and see the abundance of art and Indigenous iconography attached to the school system. I know there is a lot of work still to do, but coming from an education system in a school that didn't even have an Aboriginal flag, it is incredible to see these changes, and there is a very hopeful feeling of optimism for the next generation and that engagement with a much broader and diverse audience. I was always a very skilled drawer as a child, and art was a favourite subject. It captured my attention and my imagination. And in high school, I had an incredible art teacher. Her name was Mrs. Wilson, and she was one of those passionate teachers that went above and beyond what was expected of her. It was through this engagement that I had the incredible opportunity of spending 4 days a week at school and 1 day a week at an art college during high school. I cannot attribute anything I've done without kind of that acknowledgement. Your willingness to be here, expand your thinking, listening, learning, engaging above and beyond what is expected, matters and makes a difference. And I am testament to this. That is what happened to me, and I'm sure you don't hear this enough, so I wanted to say thank you. The art college that I went to whilst I was in high school was a very technically skill-driven school where I gained advanced teaching in life drawing, oil painting, and exposure to other young artists. It didn't delve too much into the contemporary art theory world, but what really grounded me was the discipline and dedication that it required to actually be an artist. And to be honest, even now I still feel like a bit of an outsider in the art world, but I continue to educate myself all the time. I'm not great at an expert on Western history or the philosophies attached to art. I try. I'm still unsure about various movements and what order they came in, and I'm still trying to learn as much as I can because art does continue to fascinate and it educates kind of throughout that, we always can be educated. But I don't put a lot of pressure on myself because of that, or my work being attached to that kind of art theory either. I'm a strong believer in making art about what you know. And for me, that is my life, the life of my people, and the life of my family and the life of my people. And this forms the underlying basis of my practice. In teaching, I think this should be encouraged. I thought about what to share with you today, and I've pieced together a few bits of my artistic history, which I said earlier, goes back about 20 years. This includes a series called Brothers, my practice relating to Aboriginalia and collecting objects, working with children and communities, particularly in regional and remote Australia, and a newly commissioned play sculpture at the Gallery of Modern Art in Brisbane. Another one of the things that I wanted to share was a letter to and an ongoing series of engagement with artist Gordon Bennett. Over many years, I did work responding and referencing Gordon. A few of these letters I made into artworks. In these instances, I would send the letter to Gordon for his approval before ever showing them publicly. And I'm so grateful that he allowed them to be seen as part of my practice, and I'll read one of them to you now. Dear Gordon Bennett, 1999 was my last year of high school and the year I went to see your exhibition, History and Memory in the Art of Gordon Bennett. It was the first art exhibition I ever attended, and it changed my life forever. My sister and I were the only Aboriginal kids at our school, and beyond my family, there are very few black role models. Seeing your paintings opened up a whole new world of possibilities. I realised that there was a way to articulate the feelings I had about myself and to understand my life story. I was no longer alone. After leaving school, I studied visual art at the university, where I was given your book, The Art of Gordon Bennett. I looked through its pages over and over again. To this day, your work continues to be an incredible motivator over my art and my life. I wanted to write this letter today. This morning, I opened the local paper to find an article about a prominent football coach who had used the term black cunt in referencing an Aboriginal player. Even in the arena of professional sport, one of the few mainstream activities where black people have been celebrated for their achievements, such language is often considered a casual remark. However, this morning's news story broke when other players from the team had quit in disgust. The coach denied he was racist, thinking the use of such derogatory language was just banter amongst the boys. As I read the article, your work, Daddy's Little Girl, number 2, came to mind, which was done in 1994. However, I thought about how the father sits on his lounge chair in your painting, in the corner of the room with his back towards the viewer. Relaxing with a smoker's pipe in hand, his daughter plays with toy blocks on the carpet in front of him. She wears a pretty Sunday dress and her blonde hair is tied up in a ribbon. She uses the blocks to spell out words abo, bung, coon, and darky. She points them towards her father to gain his approval, love, and attention. The Southern Cross floats in the background, strategically placed within a crucifix. It is a powerful work illustrating how racism is taught from one generation to the next. As I continue to read the article and think about your work, I wondered if you had imagined that some 16 years later, that derogatory and racist language would still be at the centre of attention within the Queensland media. Could you have predicted that the Southern Cross would become a symbolic branding for a growing number of young Australians keen to demonstrate xenophobic views? The cycle of racism is ever present. We must always hope it will be broken. Even though we have never met, you are my mentor. Your work keeps me going. It is a guiding voice. And I wanted to make a new work based on your painting, not to gain greater recognition or to steal your work, but to honour your message. You inspire me. Tony Albert, June 2010. So for me, that's 13 years ago that I wrote that. It's interesting to reflect on. But I chose to share this letter in this forum to demonstrate how powerful art actually can be. It has the ability to heal, to transcend culture, age, and language, to change the way we see the world, and most certainly, as we all know, to educate. I ended up writing a couple of letters to Gordon throughout the years, and I only ever displayed them with his consent. Gordon sadly passed away in 2014. His work continues to be an inspiration to me and so many, and I'm so wonderful to have established a relationship with his wife and daughter in the aftermath of that, and to have a continued relationship and look at potential opportunities of engagement through his trust. So another kind of interesting part of my story is the use of collected objects. In my early childhood, when I was around 6 or 7, I started collecting Aboriginalia, a term that is used to describe representations of Aboriginal people on kind of objects. My family spent a lot of time at secondhand shops. It was literally where we got everything we needed in life, and then the opportunity to engage a little bit further through the Aboriginalia was really a huge part of my childhood identity. And of course, in those days, you could literally fill bags of crap for a few dollars. On TV, we rarely saw Aboriginal people, so we're always interested, myself and my sister, with objects with Aboriginal people on them. It was always exciting to see these motifs on plates, TV, teacups, drinking glasses, playing cards, ashtrays, matchboxes, gift wrapping paper. I literally say if it's ever been made, it's been made with an Aboriginal image on it and not an image that has been made by Aboriginal people. So around 2002, my collection grew so large that it could no longer be housed within my living environment. So I took it, it was literally gone to the studio to be stored, where as an artist, any practicing artists know, studios do become a storage place for other people's objects too, seemingly. But it was here that they made a natural progression from storage into my work. First, I was replicating images through painting, and then there was a very natural progression to the objects actually just starting to enter into the artworks. And now whilst these objects are still highly disregarded to places like secondhand shop, and occasionally I'll get things from eBay, you can still go to tourist shops and buy brand new items with kind of images of Aboriginal people unapologetically displayed alongside native flora and fauna as if to represent this long lost history of who we are as people. There remain many instances for Aboriginal people where we are meant to be seen and not heard. I want to change this scenario and the instigation of people remaining voiceless, particularly through works like the trilogy series, A Collected History, Rearranging Our History, and Projecting Our Future, which all utilise the collection and give voices back to the men, women, and children who have been dispossessed and disadvantaged. Rearranging Our History was executed whilst I was in residence in Beijing in 2010, and the work focused exclusively on oil on velvet paintings, 97 to be precise. Particularly prevalent in the 1970s, they were sold as product for the tourist market and paint-by-number kits for home craft. From honourable tribesmen to cute big-eyed children and native flora and fauna, black velvet paintings were a big craze, and the enhanced contrast between the fabric hue and the oil paints was their kind of attractive appeal. I used velvet paintings as I feel they emphasise the anachronistic quality key to recognising visual stereotypes of Aboriginal people. Overlaid with text, the words reference and reflect language from popular culture, hip-hop, political consciousness, and web-based technologies. The pairing of these images alludes to the myths of Aboriginal people as innately primitive, and the combination of vintage velvet and the text also suggest issues associated with racial and cultural differences. Furthering my artistic career, I moved to Sydney for a residency at Artspace in 2010, and I woke to the community news that 2 teenagers had been shot in King's Cross overnight. The response from the local community was one of anger and frustration, and protest was staged in response. I attended one of these, and I was particularly moved by the young Aboriginal men in attendance who had drawn targets over their chest. For me, seeing these young men was both a sad yet poignant experience because it reinforced my feelings that as Aboriginal men, we are walking targets. This is akin to the labelling that had arisen from the Northern Territory intervention. Aboriginal men, without being named or convicted, were accused of being woman bashers and pedophiles. In both cases, there was a tendency to place blanket generalisations over Aboriginal people. It is as if in this country that you're black, you're automatically labelled a criminal. And unfortunately, the statistics for incarceration reinforce this thinking. For a long time now, I've been creating a series of ongoing works called Black and Blue, which examine police violence and brutality. And like the alarming rate of Aboriginal deaths in custody, the police brutality directed towards Aboriginal people is driven by an underlying racist attitude. As an Aboriginal man, I feel like an ongoing target of this abuse. The subjects of my portrait, brothers, are teenagers who boarded the Girramay Youth Hostel in the Sutherland Shire, Sydney, despite being presented quite literally as moving targets. They each stand resolute, bathed in a pool of warm light and surrounded by darkness. Many of these images were mounted on aluminium and hand-painted using line markings and shield designs from my country in far north Queensland, abstract figures and mathematical equations, as well as quotations from diverse sources. Each of these boys was so wonderful to work with. They were bright and talented and full of youthful energy. It breaks my heart to see the beautiful young men being or feeling targeted. And ultimately in these works, I wanted to capture beautifully deeply beautiful portraits of proud young men who are defiantly approaching their adulthood. It was interesting for me that this predated the hideous events in the United States which prompted the Black Lives Matter protests. In 2020, the wave of Black Lives Matter movements across the globe unfolded. These movements reinforced a spotlight on Australia's fraught relationship with its First Nations peoples. In particular, the movement increased community awareness of the disturbing reality of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the most incarcerated people on earth. Former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd described this phenomenon as an Indigenous incarceration epidemic. In the midst of COVID-19 pandemic, this description is a timely reminder of the life-threatening and destructive impact of epidemics and pandemics alike. Distressingly, the rate at which First Nations people are incarcerated continues to climb each year. These are the statistics for 2020. First Nations people comprise 3% of the population, but make up 29% of the Aboriginal prison system. Young First Nations people comprise of 6% of youth in Australia, and their population makes up 48% of the youth prison population. In fact, juvenile justice in the Northern Territory is at times 100% Aboriginal. The last person to be executed in Australian prison by capital punishment was in Victoria, 1967. The last black man to die in police custody in the hands of a policeman was last week. These statistics are not okay. It is important that we work to continue to engage with the social and political economics of Indigenous life, and that these statistics and issues remain a part of the greater conversations attached to the realities of daily life for First Nations people. Our youth and children remain amongst the most vulnerable. There are many times I'm invited to participate in workshops and residencies in regional and remote areas. And I want to use this platform to share a story about working with and collaborating with the extremely remote community of Warrakoona. I'm just going to have a sip of water. And I'd like to acknowledge the families of Warrakoona, the lands within Western Australia, for hosting me so generously. Warrakoona became my home for a month, a remote community situated 330 kilometres west of Uluru, just on the border of the Northern Territory and Western Australia, on the Western Australian side. The township of approximately 180 people is nestled amongst the spectacular Rawlinson Ranges of the Gibson Desert. What do you want? This sounds like a very simple question, but unfortunately and shamefully, this question is rarely ever directed at Aboriginal people. In a society that dictates our needs to us, what is best for our people is often prescribed without consultation. Exemplified again by the Northern Territory intervention, where paternalistic reforms based on reductive generalisations and commentary was enforced on an entire populations of Indigenous people with blanket uniformity. And it was here that the journey began, with the posting a very simple yet poignant question. So the artists of Warrakoona have a long artistic history of expression, and the commencement in 2005 of the Arts Centre was fully owned and governed by Aboriginal people, providing services to artists living in and visiting Warrakoona, as well as the neighbouring communities of Warnum and Padjar. Warnum artists are energetic, creative and happy. The Arts Centre is where men and women, young and old, can paint and share. Many years ago, as part of a previous residency, the artist of Warrakoona had done a workshop in working with tin rubbish, and they wished to revisit and expand upon this idea whilst I was there. Knowing and studying my work, they also wanted to make new work within the residency collaboratively, focused on political issues in the community. They wanted me to engage with children and young people. They wanted to play bingo, and all of this became possible while I was there. Initially, I was taken to Padjar, one of the additional communities serviced through the Arts Centre. It's located a couple of hours' drive from Warrakoona, with a very small population of 30 people. The part of the road leading to Padjar is on the notoriously dangerous Gun Barrel Highway, and the highway veers off to the east before you reach Padjar. The road is relatively unmaintained, and any travellers are warned to proceed with great caution. Its location and isolation make it a magical place, but also a very dangerous place. And it was here that senior artists Nancy and Dorothy took me to the story place of the Echidna. We participated in ceremony, which involved the artist singing, as well as all of us rubbing leaves against this very special and sacred rock. It was an unbelievable experience, and I got to hear a lot about the area and the history. With my own Aboriginal connection being the lush tropical rainforest of North Queensland, I'd kind of never felt so far away of what was familiar in terms of landscape. However, this extension of love, learning, knowledge with the artist was reminiscent of my old people from home. The humility was what was familiar. Driving back through the desert, there was no road. In fact, we were winding around trees and spinifex, and at one point Nancy yelled to stop the car. And she literally had the door open before it came to a complete halt. In the red sand, there were two tracks of goanna. There were two goanna tracks side by side. The almost faint marks in the sand were more evident on closer inspection. How Nancy was able to see them from a moving troopie, I will never understand, but it goes to show the testament to the artist and the community's attachment to the land and the landscape. Nancy said two sets of tracks represented a male and female, and when they walk together, it's more evident that the female will be pregnant at that time. Goannas carry their eggs within their stomach, and they are like a what do you say? When food's really fancy, a delicacy. Yeah, goanna eggs, a delicacy. And I had not hunted for goanna before. We don't have, I've never done that. And I knew from the look on Nancy's face that we were not going home empty-handed. We tracked the goanna for about an hour. The car was literally invisible at this point to us. And I was actually getting really worried about how we'd find our way back. We were about to give up, and the tracks made their way under a large rock. Nancy threw a crowbar that just zoomed past my face. Unfortunately, she missed the goanna, and I just heard, "Quick boy, run." So I took off, running as fast as I could. I caught up to the goanna, and in its defense, it had turned to me, stood up on its back legs, and hissed. And I was in two minds, actually, about striking it. But I thought if I did not knock this goanna over the head, I would meet a similar fate when I had returned. And I wasn't going to let that happen. I swung down with great force and knocked the goanna out. Carrying it around the neck, I returned to Nancy and Dorothy, and they were both cheering, and they were so happy. In the car on the way back, they told me I was a good hunter. They also told me that at the Echidna Story Place, they had asked the ancestors that we catch goanna that day. It had been a long time since they had the opportunity to go out in a troopie. Us arriving in the troopie gave access to that site. We had the car. So it was a long time. The ancestors had answered their song and our wishes. I'd been blessed by the land and the people, and they were my new friends. From here on in, I knew that the trip was going to be successful. We were going to make great work. We were going to be watched over. We were going to be safe, and we're going to enjoy our time together. This is just how things are, Aboriginal way. And when I think back to the initial statement, what do you want? I kind of think, this is what we want. Some kind of autonomy. The opportunity to share something and do something our way, directed by us, for us. There was no timetables or schedules. We knew what we wanted, and we went about doing that. This was a very special time for me, and I always keep those lessons close to my heart. I hold on to the philosophy and trust in my own way of working. Looking to the future and the year ahead, I'm interested in the ways in which institutions are changing and challenging the cultural landscape of art galleries. There has been a huge push towards accessibility, children's and families, and diverse audiences. A couple of years ago, I was invited to submit a concept with collaborator Nell, a wonderful Australian artist, female, non-Indigenous, to work on a place sculpture for the Gallery of Modern Art in Brisbane. And I'm assuming there's images of all these things that I'm talking about. This project takes place on country, on the edge of the Brisbane River, Maywa, on the place of Kirill, the story place of the water rat. The site sits between the Brisbane River and Quag Goma, which actually to the people of Brisbane represents a gateway between these two worlds. Knowing that the Goma building, designed by Kerry and Lindsay Clare, was inspired by the simple forms of a classic Queenslander house. For those international guests, it's an iconic high-set house on stilts with a wide veranda and utilises the breeze in a very hot, humid climate. We thought that if Goma was actually a home and the proposed site would be its front lawn, and nostalgic memories of suburban childhood recalled the images of the recognisable Australian green garden hose strewed across the front yard. We were proposing an oversized hose sculpture that twists and turns across the site like the course of the Brisbane River. The green Australian garden hose was immediately recognised and has memorable connotations for many Australians, particularly the childhood summer. We spend many days under the hose. By placing this oversized household object onto the lawn, we also pay homage to Queensland's big attractions, which are inherently playful and hold a special place to many of us. There's also a nod to pop art and the precedence of everyday objects within art. As a child, Nell's family would take annual holidays to Queensland for 6 weeks, staying in an old Queenslander. The family's pilgrimages to the Big Pineapple, the Big Shell, the Big Crow, and the House of Bottles were amongst her first experience of what is art. For me, I affectionately remember the Big Crab outside of Muddy's seafood restaurant in Cardwell, my own hometown in North Queensland. Therefore, in homage to this history, we have affectionately titled our project, The Big Hose. There is much humour in the work, and I love that our concept has been so understood and so loved. We wanted to refer to water without actually needing to use this finite resource, and given our climate tendency towards drought or floods, the essential role of water and our environment and the environment to human and animal survival, the importance and respect to these issues needed to be acknowledged. In essence, the Big Hose marries themes of nature with the urban and built environment in a uniquely Australian way. It is a wonderful project to be involved in, and I'm excited to open that later this year, so please keep an eye out for that. So I'm often asked about the politics in my work, particularly in relation to my cultural identity and how I define my art and life practice. I'm undeniably political. Unfortunately, political art has a bad reputation for being overtly preachy or didactic. Sometimes, also by labelling an artwork political, it negates the fact that you actually have to talk deeply about the intent because its message is so clearly evident. I always try to balance this with contemporary art audiences with an aesthetic which continues to mix and be contemplative, conceptual, challenging, intellectual, at the same time, as been stated throughout this week, accessible. This was important for me to say in context of this week and this conference, and it's the alignment with the beautiful Emily Kumnaware exhibition and Aboriginal and Indigenous art. The idea of my work being political and yet the work of Kumnaware not is problematic. And I'm not saying that in this case that is what is happening. I'm commenting on the generalised way in which what is said to be traditional Aboriginal art and what is considered to be political or urban Aboriginal art are seen in a different light. And when I look deeply at the work on display this week, the connection to country and sense of space and place is political. The attachment of these works have to country is deeply political. In fact, very few of us will ever know or understand country the way in which Kumnaware does, or those communities, so regional and remote. These are the best examples of land rights we will ever see. So for me, those works are not only political, they represent the pinnacle of political art in this country, potentially worldwide. They also explore and understand the incredible tension between what one considers ownership and one considers belonging. A truly valuable lesson for us all. So I don't wish to tell the viewer exactly how to think, rather to engage with them in a conversation or to plant a seed of thought. So perhaps a 50-metre long wall emblazoned with the statement, "Pay attention, motherfuckers," is a little less subtle than I'd normally aim for. However, some works also demand this kind of abrasiveness. And when you spend time looking at that work and the 25 other artists who contributed to it, you realise that it becomes much more than a gratuitous one-liner. In fact, we really want people to pay attention to our stories and to see the work as relevant contributions to contemporary art and life. There exist so many institutional definitions, labels, and categories that try to pigeonhole who I am and what I do. I'm a human being, I'm an Aboriginal man, I'm a contemporary artist, I am me. I actually don't wish for any further fixed definitions, as I'm always open to learning and experiencing new things and challenging myself in whatever way I can to become a better person. Thank you. Going over.
Where's some water? I've got some water. Okay. Pour me some water.
Sorry, I went much longer than I had time.
You don't need to apologise at all. I'm a little lost for words, and I don't think thank you quite covers, but you got all the whistles and the claps, and I think the room felt the energy of that amazing talk. So thank you, but I know that's not enough. We've got a whole bunch of questions here, and they're going to come in thick and fast, I think. So the first question is, collaboration is a big part of your practice. Can you speak to how this informs the work you make as an individual when you are in your studio?
Sure. It's not only a big part, I think it's the most important part, and I hope everyone knows and understands to actually walk in someone else's shoes, to be on country, to understand any collaborator, whether, and I've worked with people overseas as well, it's just the best way to experience anything. Like really, in the moment, on the ground, it's not about reading a book, it's not about research, it's physically doing things. And of course, as an artist, you take away the most simplest things is how, what brushes, what media, what kind of, the way in which people create work. But then you also take away their sense of a thinking and being that will innately be different to what yours is. And when you start to, the common thread of humanity is melding together all those things. And yeah, absolutely, of course, it's silly to say it wouldn't, but also it is, the best part of my practice is being able to collect not Aboriginal but other ways of people living life.
Well, that's nice. That's a very nice response. Do you have any thoughts, suggestions on how teachers can use art as a tool to communicate and educate how police brutality divides communities and further implies racism? That is a big, big question.
It is. And like Nick said in the introduction, just about trying to engage with language, knowing that you're not going to say it right means so much more to me than someone not trying at all. And it's, even with the young people in my life, knowing, understanding, particularly have Indigenous children in the classroom, we all have an attachment to someone in prison. I mean, that those statistics marry with that kind of life. And to just not engage or talk about it, I think is really problematic. So instigating chats about, why that happens. The first thing we teach our children is if they're in trouble or if there's something wrong, who do you go to?
Yeah.
The police. You don't tell that to Aboriginal children. You don't say that in America to African American youth. That's the last people you want attached or in your life is police. Look, there is great, I have family that are liaison officers. There's lots of work being done in remedy and changing that, but without any dialogue at all about it, it continues to be so problematic. Even investing in the fact in saying that, I was so overwhelmed within the juvenile justice system that within the Northern Territory, 100% Aboriginal children. There's no engagement with the broader community. What all these statistics implies to me is that Aboriginal people are really bad, or that there is a problem in Australia with racism within institutional context. I know Aboriginal people aren't really bad. So, for me, the only answer leads to, preconceived institutional ideas of racism and who we are as people. So just my recommendation is that engagement. And it can be on a very lighthearted level, but introducing children to these concepts, I don't think is a bad thing.
I agree. The next question is, do you think it's important for artists to strive to be included in institutions as trustees, advisors? Would you have advice for artists leaning this way?
Absolutely. Our involvement inside anything, we have a seat at a table. I'm the first Indigenous trustee in 129-year history of the gallery. Don't clap too yet. What that means is one seat at the table means I can just get outvoted by every single person, and I always do. But my feedback, my comments, the way in which I will look to an attachment and get to vocalize, at least is at that table. People are going away with an alternative idea or thought, even if they don't agree with it. It is said, it is processed. At times, when I make a point, I also ask and make sure that it is minuted. I want to make sure our documents reflect that if a decision is made that I don't consent to, that I want that down in writing. I want my people to know that I stood up for them and that I wanted a change to happen. But in saying that, I realise, because I went in there going, I'm going to change the world through this position. No, I'm not. But I'm going to advance one step. And really, I take a great sense of pleasure or accomplishment in very small things at the moment, because that's how hard it is, and within inside these walls, and that is something that if you don't do it becomes very discouraging. It does seem like the weight of your world on your shoulders, but very small things get to happen. And I look at things like the Archibald and Wynne Prize. The Wynne Prize for Landscape for the past 10 years has nearly been 50% Aboriginal. Prior that, it was about at 5%. And when you're looking at the biggest prize in Australia attached to landscape, how are Aboriginal voices not attached to that? So, very, very small things come through, which make me, feel really great, and that voice is there. So we absolutely need more seats at the table. And not just Aboriginal voices, diverse voices. I mean, I'm just grateful that board is 50% women. You'll be surprised at how many boards I sit at. And I'm like, is there any women on the board? Or, I'm making decisions about how women engage with space. It's so highly problematic, and yet being how our systems have run for such an incredibly long time.
Yeah. Thank you. And like you said, the importance of having all of that recorded is incredible. Can you please elaborate on the collective Proper Now?
Sure. Proper Now is a group, I think we're around 10 people. I should actually know that. It is artists who challenge the position that is ascribed to Aboriginal art. We make art for I guess for the sense of this conversation, that not necessarily looks Aboriginal, or the prescribed idea of what Aboriginal art is. We were all great friends. We were having breakfast, lunch and dinner together. We decided to start this collective 2003. Last year we won the Vera List Centre Jane Lombard Prize for Art and Social Justice in New York, which was, way too amazing. I don't think that how huge that is resonant within us yet, because it is really, really quite amazing for a group that has actually never shown institutionally within this country to be recognised overseas before we are recognised here for the work that we're doing and how important that work actually is. So lit a bit of a fire under us. We've engaged with 3 new members now. We have an admin position, but it is just a collective of like-minded artists that what we realised makes a difference between doing something by yourself and with someone. It makes the difference between laughing in a situation and or crying in a situation. And there's too many of us crying when we can have a laugh with each other about a situation and be able to get through it when we're collectively together.
I think we've got a couple more minutes. Oh, that's nice little clap. So a couple more questions. How does living away from country and mob shape your practice and message? Does it strengthen your connection to mob and culture?
It's a very interesting question. It's so it's sad not to live, sometimes on country. I just had a cousin and an auntie down for the last month, and we were sitting making jarwins, a beautiful basket from North Queensland, together. It's a difficult question because whoever you ask is going to have a different answer. I live off country, but I'm so grateful to have and know my country, and a lot of people that live off country. It's because that there's been a sever within that tie, not because of us as people, but because of the implementation and policies which have torn our people apart. So it does make it hard, but I have a constant community access and contact. And I always say that as much as who I am as an Aboriginal person from North Queensland might not seem to enter into my work, it's always there. I think, holistically, that is there. Queerness is another interesting thing. It's not part of my work, but I think, it's always there regardless of, because it's me that's in this work. So what you also do is you find, as blackfellas, you find community wherever you're living as well. And we have a community within the art world, and we have a community in our communities. When I always say as well, moving to Sydney in 2010 gave me access and a platform to the rest of the world as a visual artist, and that was really important to me. Internationally, unless you say Sydney, people don't understand what you're talking about in Australia. So in professional ideas or in development of contemporary art, that gave me a lot more access to things. It's definitely, the mob, living, working, making art in community. There's no problem with that. The trajectory, the voice, the way in which I wanted to present my story meant, really for me, is about living off country. But of course, there's huge dreams of, wouldn't it be lovely to go fishing every day? And yeah, wonderful. So it's a double-edged sword kind of question, and any person would give a different answer to that. But yeah, the accessibility I have to my community is the most important thing to me.
What is your advice to students building their artistic careers and entering the professional art landscape?
I'm assuming, is this for all students or Black students, or advice for students?
I'll say for all students.
What my involvement with the education and institutional system, particularly with Griffith, which is very close, is that they made within art it mandatory for First Nations elective in first year university. And I really applauded that kind of opportunity for engagement, especially in Australia. Overseas it doesn't matter, but in Australia, particularly when we're looking at the statistics we're doing, the fraught nature we have with appropriation, with protocols, with working and looking at, the foundation of what that is so incredibly important. And for a new initiative, I think that's kind of crazy. But and also knowing from lecturers that with mandatory Indigenous education and the percentage of marks that makes up the amount of students that don't engage. Yeah. They just don't do it. They don't feel a need to do it. So reimagining the way in which we're even Australia in terms of a continent and how it's positioned globally. Like we have to rethink everything, and that you literally go back to the drawing board. Our vernacular is so important. The positioning of that before real significant and substantial change is made. And I don't think it's there yet, but it will be there. The same with the Indigenous presence within the context of contemporary international art. The trajectory is there. I'm with Fondation Katia in Paris. Kimberly Moulton is with the Tate, curator of Aboriginal art at the Tate. Leiluli Agreshi, not Aboriginal but Indigenous, in Montreal. Erin Vink at the ArcLF New South Wales went from curator of Aboriginal art to curator of Aboriginal art and global Indigenous art. So that the general vernacular of what we're at is not part of the art world yet, and it needs to be, and it will be. Yeah.
I love in all the heavy work that you do, like heavy topics, you're always so positive about the future. It's amazing. One last question. What is next creatively for you?
Well, so we've got the public art sculpture. This 2 years, I was very aware of the positions that I've taken up would take me away from my art. So in my early 40s now, I said there's 20-year practice that exists for me. I sat down and spoke to the family. If I'm going to be doing these positions, I'm going to really need a lot of support. They're going to take away from my art practice, but they're going to embed what I hope is a strong foundation for the continuation of these kind of things. So as the curatorial First Nations Fellow for Foundation Katia, I don't see myself as much as doing the fellowship as setting up the fellowship. And that's very much what I'm interested in at the moment. I don't think it's taken away from that I'm being an artist, but there's just a tilt and a shift, and I'll go back to that soon, but I'm looking at about a 2-year period of much more holistic philosophical and philanthropic engagement within the art world.
Thank you very much, Tony Albert. You've been amazing.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
I've got a little gift for you too.
Sounds like me. I'm like, where's my...
Tony, thank you so much for everything that you do and everything that you've contributed to our conference. And thank you, Leanne, for facilitating that wonderful conversation. We are sad to let you know that unfortunately Marie Clark is unable to be with us today for the final keynote of the program. For those of you who are wanting to squeeze the most out of your conference experience, at that time we will be screening a special recording of a recent talk with Lindy Lee about the development of her major new sculptural installation Ouroboros, which is taking place outside in the gallery's forecourt. Lindy Lee was joined by Ngunnawal Elder Auntie Jude Barlow as Elder in Residence of this project, and Sean Guy from Urban Art Projects, who are the workshop responsible for the incredible engineering and technology that will help realise this ambitious work. So if you'd like to see that talk, it will screen in the theatre at the time of Marie Clark's keynote for our on-site audience as well as our online audience. Because this might be the last time that we gather together in the theatre as our conference community, Leanne and I just wanted to take this opportunity to say a few thank yous and just to finish off this incredible experience that we've all had together over the last few days. So, Leanne.
Thank you, Georgia. I just want to do a big shout out of thanks to the broader learning team. There is about 40 of us who've made this conference happen over the last 3 days, but there's just some special shout outs I want to do for people who are behind the scenes that you never see, that have been working on this program for about 12 months. So that is in particular Isaac and Justin and Julia and Adam, and they're all in that bio box up there, plus Victoria. A shout out to Tilda, who everyone who's done either a teacher's and voice, or you'll be doing one in the next session, will all have a talk to Tilda as you prepare for your presentations, and has been making all the magic happen within this room. And I just wanted to thank everyone for coming. We really would love you to share your reflections and stay with us this afternoon. We're going to go into the garden, into the sculpture garden anyway, and you'll see staff kind of dotted around. You can just spend some time reflecting on your own. Reflection's a really important part of what we do here and making time and space for it. And so we invite you to either reflect by yourself or join one of the staff members who have some questions and can continue some really important conversations that I know that have been happening here over the last 3 days. That is for on-site. Online, we'll also have staff available for you to join a Zoom conversation and, again, continue those really rich conversations that have been happening. I think that's it.
Well, just lastly, I'd like to thank again all the representatives from the Art Education Associations who've been so generous in their help to develop this program and to be here and to help us facilitate the Teacher's Voice session. So thank you again to your contribution, and we look forward to working with all of you in the future. Thanks so much. Enjoy your lunch.